No one should have been looking at her like that. A worn-down man kneeling in the brutal summer heat, his eyes fixed on a young woman sitting on a sun-scorched boulder with both legs hanging over the edge. From a distance, it looked like the kind of thing a righteous town would never forgive. A hot wind dragged dead weeds across the open land outside Laramie, Wyoming territory, and Cole Hargrove did not move. His horse stood behind him near the water trough, the reins hanging loose, its ears flicking against the flies. The old barn sat silent in the distance, and the young woman in front of him trembled from somewhere deep inside herself. She had been running since the sky first began to pale. Twice, she had fallen hard. More than once, she had nearly given up. But fear has a strange way of forcing broken bodies back onto their feet when everything else inside them has already collapsed. Her bare legs had torn through barbed wire and brittle brush, and by the time she dropped onto that stone, it was no longer a choice. Her legs had simply made the decision for her. Her dress was ripped across the back. The thin fabric hung open where it had no right to be open. One knee was swollen dark, the skin raw and scraped. Her feet and calves were coated in pale dust. She tried to pull the fabric around herself, but her fingers shook too badly to manage it. Cole stayed where he was. He gave her space. He let the silence do what words could not. He had seen damage before. The war had given him a thorough education in what one human being could do to another, and what silence could build when decent people chose to look away. But this felt different. Quieter. Colder. The kind of wrong that fire could not burn clean. The young woman swallowed hard. Her eyes flicked toward him once, then quickly turned away. She had the look people carry when they have learned to prepare for strangers the way others prepare for storms, as if whatever happened next would simply be another thing she would have to survive. Cole slowly removed his coat and held it out to her without stepping closer. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady. "Nothing bad is going to happen to you right now." She hesitated. Then, with a sharp, desperate movement, she turned just enough for him to see what marked her sides and back. The bruises were deep. Dark. Old and new at the same time. Her voice barely escaped her. "Look for yourself." Cole looked, and something inside him shifted. Not desire. Not curiosity. Something closer to recognition. The kind of recognition a field surgeon learns to carry like a stone in his chest. Those were not marks from a fall. They were a record. Long, deliberate. Written into her skin by someone who had taken his time. His jaw tightened. Not from shock. He had lived too long to be surprised by cruelty. It tightened under the weight of knowing exactly what he was looking at. He stepped back to give her more room, then placed the coat on the stone beside her instead of draping it over her shoulders. She wrapped it around herself like armor. "Who?" Cole asked quietly. She did not answer at first. Her lips moved before any sound came out. Her eyes filled with something that was not only pain. It was the kind of fear that does not visit. It moves in and stays. Then the name came, barely louder than a whisper. Denton Voss. The hot wind rolled through the dry grass. Somewhere far off, a fence post groaned. Cole's eyes drifted toward the road cutting across the flat land. If that name was real, then nothing about this afternoon was finished. He looked back at the young woman on the boulder, still shaking, still breathing, still holding herself together beneath a stranger's coat. And something stirred inside him, something he had buried deep after the war followed him home. A sense of duty. The kind that does not let a man sleep. Because if what he had seen was real, then someone was already coming. And they would not come with polite questions. The question was not whether she was telling the truth. The question was this: when that man came to drag her back, would Cole step aside like every other person in her life had already done? Or would he finally stand on the right side of something and refuse to move? Cole did not press her. Men who rushed too fast usually had something to hide. Instead, he walked to the well, drew water into a tin cup, and set it halfway between them. Close enough for her to reach without having to come near him. She took it. Both hands gripped the cup tightly. Water ran down her chin, and she did not seem to notice. That told him plenty. Ruth Calloway arrived a little later, moving slowly the way she always did, as if the land itself had taught her patience. Her eyes were quick and sharp, taking in the young woman and then Cole in one single glance. She did not waste words on questions that did not need asking. "Inside," Ruth said simply. Cole stood beside the door while Ruth guided the girl into the cool shade of the barn. For a while, he heard low voices. Then silence. Then one short, muffled sob that stopped as if it had been cut with a blade. The people carrying the heaviest things inside were often the ones who straightened their shoulders the fastest. Ruth came out several minutes later, wiping her hands on her apron. "It's bad," she said. Cole did not ask for more. He already understood what she meant. Ruth lowered her voice even further. "It wasn't an accident. And it wasn't the first time." Cole breathed out through his nose. He had heard that sentence before, shaped almost exactly the same way. Different geography. Different names. The same story underneath. Inside, the young woman, Clara, because that was the name she finally gave them, sat curled inside his coat as if she were trying to take up less space in the world. Cole crouched near the entrance, far enough away not to crowd her. "You have people somewhere else?" he asked. "Family outside this circle?" She slowly shook her head. "Married," she said. The word came out flat, as if it explained everything and nothing. Cole did not react quickly. He sat with it for a moment. "Your husband did this?" Another turn of her head. Then, in the quietest voice he had heard in a long time, she said. "He doesn't stop it." That landed heavier than a fist. Cole leaned back a little, breathed, then asked for the name again. "Denton Voss." He knew it. Anyone who had spent time within half a day of Laramie knew it. Not the kind of name that came with a reputation worth having. The kind people avoided speaking in mixed company. Ruth folded her arms. "That whole family has been rotten since those boys were too young to shave." Clara looked at the floor. "He told me if I ran, he'd say I robbed him. Said not one soul would take my word over his." Cole let a quiet, tired smile cross his face. "Men like that always think they're the only ones allowed to tell a story," he said. He rose to his full height and brushed dust from his vest. "Let's see how his version holds up in front of the sheriff." Clara looked up fast, alarm crossing her face. "He'll come after me." Cole glanced toward the long, flat stretch of land baking under the noon sun. Something shifted at the far edge of the road. Heat haze, maybe. Or maybe not. "Yes," Cole said simply. "He will." He rested one hand near his holster without drawing, reminding himself it was there. Some stories do not stay buried. They came. 3 riders appeared in the distance, slow and deliberate. No hiding. No hurry. Just a straight approach down the low, dusty road, like men who expected the world to clear a path for them. They had followed the trail. Bare footprints in dry dirt do not vanish quickly. Cole stood in the middle of the yard, one hand loose near his pistol, the other hanging easy at his side. He did not shout. Men who arrived like that did not come for conversation. Behind him, inside the barn, Clara went completely still. Ruth leaned close to her, murmuring something steady and low. Cole kept his eyes on the road. The lead rider came fully into view. Tall. Long-limbed. Sitting his horse as if he had been built on top of it. Denton Voss. No badge. No rush. An old scar crossed one cheek, pale and permanent. The kind of scar a man earns in bad circumstances and never mentions. He wore the expression of someone who had decided long ago that the world owed him obedience. The 2 other riders spread out slightly as they closed the distance. Not smart men, but obedient ones. Voss brought his horse to a stop a few yards away. He did not dismount. He did not need another way to announce dominance. You have property on this land that belongs to my kin, he said. His voice was level. That was the troubling part. Cole did not step forward. The only thing on this land, he said, is someone who decided to stay here. Voss gave a thin smile. The girl is married. I expect you understand how that works. Cole tilted his head slightly. Funny. Marriage usually doesn't leave marks like the ones I saw. One of the riders behind Voss snorted. Wrong decision. Voss did not turn, but the sound died immediately. Voss leaned forward in the saddle. You don't know the whole picture, he said. Cole nodded once. You're probably right, he agreed. So let's ride into town and tell it to someone who can sort it properly. Something flickered across Voss's face. Barely anything. But it was there. No reason to drag town law into a family matter, Voss said. Inside the barn, a boot shifted on the wooden floor. Clara was still listening. Cole took one slow step to the side, placing himself directly between the riders and the barn door. Then I suggest you turn those horses around, he said, before this becomes louder than you came prepared for. Voss studied him now, taking his first real measure of the man. An older man. Hands relaxed. Eyes steady. No fear worth naming. That disturbed him more than a drawn weapon would have. Without a word from Voss, one of the hired men dismounted and started toward the barn at a fast walk. Cole moved first. Not violently. Precisely. He caught the handle of a long shovel leaning against a fence post and brought it down in a hard arc. The metal edge struck the man clean across the wrist. Bone met iron. The man dropped into the dirt with a howl. The second man came from the right. Cole turned into him, took the blow across his shoulder, then drove his elbow back with enough force to send the man stumbling into the water trough. Pain lit through Cole's arm sharp enough to remind him his body was not what it had been at 20. Water splashed up. A horse shied sideways. Dust lifted from the ground. Voss did not move. He watched. He was the kind of man who used other people first and only committed himself when the numbers looked right. Then, slowly and deliberately, he let his hand settle on the grip of his pistol. Cole saw it. He did not draw his own. Because the moment that happened, there would be nothing left to discuss. And somewhere directly behind him, a young woman held her breath, waiting to see what kind of man Cole Hargrove truly turned out to be when things reached the edge. So the question was not whether Voss would draw. The question was whether Cole would act first, or wait one moment too long. Cole did not pull the trigger. Not yet. His hand remained near the iron, but his eyes stayed locked on Voss. Men like Dent and Voss were built for exactly this kind of standoff. They needed the other man to flinch first. It justified everything that came after. Cole had watched that game play out for years of war. Young men with fast hands and clean consciences, believing speed made them righteous. It did not. It only meant they finished being wrong sooner. Voss let the silence stretch, then slowly moved his hand away from the pistol grip. Just a little. Not a retreat. An invitation to believe it was over. You're making a small thing into something it doesn't need to be, Voss said. Cole exhaled quietly through his nose. You're the one who made it this big, he answered. Behind him, Clara shifted again. That tiny sound said everything. Voss heard it. His eyes tracked toward the barn doorway, and there it was. Clear as sunlight. The hunger to own. Not land. Not horses. People. My brother's wife belongs at home, Voss said, his voice tightened by 1 degree. Cole nodded once. Your brother isn't here, he said. Voss's jaw moved as if he were chewing something he had not expected to taste. Cole made his move then. Not violent. He stepped back. Deliberately. Slowly. The step of a man making a decision, not surrendering one. Here's how this goes, Cole said. We all ride into Laramie. You bring your brother. Clara gives her statement to the sheriff. The law handles what comes next. One of the men on the ground groaned, clutching his wrist. The other stayed near the trough, coughing and unwilling to try anything else. Voss looked at both of them, then back at Cole. He did not like what the numbers told him. Not in daylight. Not with Ruth Calloway already standing in the barn doorway with her arms crossed. Fine, Voss said at last. The word came out wrong. Not agreement. A man choosing a different way to win. Cole caught it. So did Ruth. Clara's grip tightened around the coat wrapped around her body, but she said nothing. They moved quickly after that. Horses turned. Dust rose and rolled behind them. Cole kept Voss in his line of sight the whole way. Men of that breed did not accept defeat. They only relocated it. The ride into town was long enough for a manufactured story to gain speed, to find its footing. And by the time Laramie's Main Street came into view, something already felt wrong in the air. Too quiet. Too organized. Voss no longer looked like a man riding into uncertainty. He looked like a man arriving somewhere he had already been. Outside the sheriff's office, sitting on a bench with his hat turning slowly in his hands and his eyes fixed on the ground, was a man Cole did not recognize. But Clara recognized him instantly. Her whole body went rigid. Her husband. Already there. Already waiting. This had never been a chase. Voss had not been behind her. He had been ahead of her the entire time. Which meant the story already being told inside that office was not Clara's story. Someone else had arrived first and planted the version they needed. Now the question became the hardest kind. When a lie is told first in a town where everyone already knows a family name, how do you pull the truth back before it is buried under the weight of it? Inside the sheriff's office, the air was close and warm. The kind of room where words stayed and settled. Eli Voss sat in the corner, eyes lowered, hands moving restlessly in his lap. He looked like a man rehearsing something he was no longer certain he believed. He glanced once at Denton, then stared back at the floor. Clara nearly collapsed right there. Not from pain. From watching the truth get pushed out of the room before it even had the chance to speak. Cole did not raise his voice. He did not slam anything on the desk. He had learned long ago that the loudest man in a room rarely had the most to say. He spoke simply. Cleanly. Fact by fact. What he had seen when he found her. What condition she had been in. What Ruth Calloway had witnessed and could testify to without hesitation. He laid it out piece by piece, like a man building something that had to stand on its own. Sheriff Aldridge listened the way a good lawman listens. Not for what he wanted to hear. For what did not fit. And Eli, sitting in that corner under the weight of too many years of silence, began to crack. Not completely. Not cleanly. Not easily. But enough. When his voice finally came out, it was rough and broken. And inside it was something a fabricated story can never carry convincingly. Exhaustion. The deeply worn sound of a man tired of being afraid of his own blood. That was enough to begin the unraveling. The rest followed. Documents. Contradictions. A fire that had been set to destroy evidence and had burned the wrong things instead. Sheriff Aldridge did not need a full written confession. He had enough to hold Denton Voss. When Voss tried one last time to perform the story in that room, no one turned to look at him. By the time the sun struck the tops of the buildings outside, Denton Voss was no longer a free man. And Clara, for the first time as far back as she could clearly remember, did not look over her shoulder when she walked through the doorway. Weeks passed. Then months. The land did not change. The same dry heat. The same long evenings. The same silence asking nothing from anyone. But Clara changed inside it. She stood with more height in her spine. She spoke to people directly, without flinching. She worked beside Ruth and learned the rhythms of a place that did not ask her to make herself small. And Cole remained what he had always been. Patient. present. Never pushing for more than she was ready to offer. One evening, when the sun bled orange across the same stretch of land where everything had begun, Clara stood beside him and said nothing for a while. Then, quietly, she spoke. "The day I told you to look, I thought I was showing you something that had been ruined." Cole gave a small nod. "Now I think," she continued, "I was showing you something that was still fighting to survive." Cole was quiet for a minute. "Not many people get a second chance at that," he said. She turned to look at him. Not with fear. Not with hesitation. Just with the clear and steady eyes of someone who had earned the right to make her own choice. She did not reach for his hand right away. She simply stood there beside him, present and unafraid. And for the first time, that was more than enough. No hurry. No debt. Just a choice made freely. And maybe that is the part worth holding on to. Not who rides in to save you, but who stays long enough to let you find your own footing again. Now I will be honest with you. Stories like this do not always arrive neatly wrapped and perfectly clean. They are gathered, remembered, shaped, and sometimes retold so the lesson can still be seen through the dust. The images you are looking at were created to help you feel it, not just follow it. If this is not your kind of story, no hard feelings. Go rest. Take care of yourself. We will cross paths another time. But if this stayed with you, even for a minute, then sit with it a little longer. Tell me where you are listening from and what time it is where you are. I truly like knowing who is on the other end of these stories. And ask yourself this. If you had been standing in that yard when those riders came down the road, which way would you have gone? If this story meant something to you, go ahead and like it, and subscribe. There are many more stories worth telling. And I will be right here when you are ready for the next one.